Have you ever witnessed something that defied all explanation? Something that, for a single breathtaking moment, made the world feel less like a collection of random events and more like a story with a hidden, benevolent author? This is a story about silence and the sound that shattered it. It's a story set not in some far-off mystical land, but in the heart of a small, sun-bleached town in West Texas. A town where the dust seems to settle not just on the pickup trucks and porch swings, but on the hopes of its people. This is the story of the Miller family, and the day their quiet world was forever changed by what many can only describe as a miracle. Our story begins with Sarah and David Miller. Sarah, a former schoolteacher with eyes that once held a vibrant light, now dimmed by a constant, low-grade worry. David, a sturdy, reliable man who worked as a foreman at the local machine shop, a man who believed in fixing things with his hands, in solutions you could see and touch. They were the kind of Americans who built their life on hard work and quiet faith, a life that was simple until it wasn't. Their center, their entire universe, was their son Leo. A beautiful boy of 5 with a head of unruly sandy hair and eyes the color of a summer sky. Eyes that were endlessly expressive because they had to be. Leo was mute. He had not spoken a single word since birth. The doctors in El Paso had been kind but firm. There was no physiological reason they could find. His vocal cords were perfectly formed. He wasn't on the autism spectrum. It was a profound, idiopathic mutism, a silence without a known cause and therefore without a known cure. They called it a psychological block, a term that felt to Sarah and David like a medical way of saying, we don't know and we can't help. So, their world became a world of silence. Not an empty silence but a loud one filled with the sounds of what wasn't there. Sarah learned to read the subtle shifts in Leo's eyes, the spark of joy when David would scoop him up after work, the cloud of frustration when he couldn't make them understand what he wanted. They developed the intricate language of gestures, of pointing, of soft touches. David, the fixer, filled the house with toys, with puzzles, with anything he thought might unlock his son. But the silence remained, a thick, invisible wall between Leo and the world. Sarah, clinging to her faith, would kneel by Leo's bed every night after he'd fallen asleep. She'd watch the steady rise and fall of his chest, his long eyelashes resting on his cheeks, and she would pray. Please God, just let me hear his voice. Just once. Let me hear him call me Mommy. But morning would come, and the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the distant whistle of the train passing through town. The weight of it was fracturing them. David started working later hours not because he had to, but because the silence at home felt heavier than any engine block at the shop. He felt like a failure. A father is supposed to protect his child, to solve their problems, and he couldn't solve this. He'd look at Leo, so perfect in every other way, and a helpless rage would bubble inside him. Rage at a universe that would give a child a voice but no way to use it. Sarah saw David pulling away, and it amplified her own isolation. Her friends, while well-meaning, didn't know what to say. Their children were chattering, singing, driving them crazy with questions. Her world had shrunk to the size of her house, a beautiful, painful prison of unspoken love. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. It was Leo's 5th birthday. They had a small party with a dinosaur cake and a few family friends. The moment came to sing, Happy Birthday. As the off-key, well-intentioned voices filled the room, the camera, which Sarah was using to record, panned to Leo's face. He wasn't smiling. He was staring at the flickering candles, his little body tense, his eyes wide with a panic they couldn't understand. He wasn't blowing out the candles. He was trying, his cheeks puffing out, but no air came. He was mimicking the action, but the fundamental connection between breath, intention, and sound was missing. He looked from his mother's encouraging face to his father's strained smile, and a single silent tear rolled down his cheek. That night, after Leo was in bed, Sarah and David had their first real fight. It wasn't loud. It was worse. It was a quiet, desperate eruption of all the fear and pain they'd been storing up. He was crying, David. On his birthday. He was crying and he couldn't even make a sound, Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. What do you want me to do, Sarah? David's voice was flat, exhausted. I've taken him to every specialist we can afford. I've read every book. There's nothing to fix. Maybe it's not about fixing, she shot back. Maybe it's about accepting. Maybe this is just who he is. And we have to learn to live with it and stop making him feel like he's broken. He's not broken, David said, his fists clenching at his sides. But something is. And I can't stand it. The gulf between them felt wider than the Texas sky. It was in this atmosphere of shattered hope that Sarah's Aunt Clara came to visit. Clara was David's aunt, a widow in her 70s who lived in New Mexico. She was a woman of deep, unshakable faith, her skin weathered by the sun and a life of hard knocks, but her eyes held a perpetual twinkle. She arrived with a casserole and a heart full of love. She saw the tension, the grief hanging in the air like dust motes. She watched Leo, a quiet, observant little ghost in his own home. On her third day there, she sat Sarah and David down at the kitchen table. "I'm not going to tell you everything happens for a reason," Clara said, her voice raspy and warm. "Sometimes terrible things just happen. But I am going to tell you that it's okay to ask for a little help. From a place you might not have looked yet." She told them about a mission church, San Juan de los Lagos, a 3-hour drive deep into the desert, almost to the Mexican border. It wasn't grand or famous. It was a tiny, humble adobe structure built by a community of immigrants generations ago. It housed a small, beautifully carved wooden statue of the Virgin of Guadalupe. The local community, and now a trickle of pilgrims from farther away, believed she was especially gracious there. That she listened. "It's a place of peace," Clara said. "Maybe you all just need some peace. A change of scenery. What's the harm?" David was skeptical. He was a practical man. He believed in God in a distant Sunday morning kind of way. But statues? Miracles? It felt like superstition. It felt like surrendering to fantasy. But he looked at Sarah, and he saw a flicker of the old light in her eyes, a fragile, desperate hope. He looked at Leo, sitting on the floor, meticulously lining up his toy cars without a sound. He was out of options. Out of ideas. What was the harm? So that Saturday they packed into the family SUV, David tense and silent behind the wheel, Sarah clutching a well-worn rosary in her lap, Aunt Clara humming a hymn, and Leo strapped into his car seat, watching the world fly by in a blur of brown and gold. The drive was long and monotonous. The desert stretched out, vast and unforgiving. It felt, to David, like a reflection of his own inner landscape, barren and empty. They passed through a tiny town that was little more than a ghost, and finally down a dusty, unpaved road they saw it. The mission church of San Juan de los Lagos was even smaller and more humble than David had imagined. It was a simple, sun-baked adobe building with a wooden cross atop its roof. A few old, weathered pews sat outside under a ramada for overflow. There was no parking lot, just a patch of hard-packed earth. It was profoundly, utterly simple. They got out of the car. The only sounds were the wind whistling through the mesquite and the distant cry of a hawk. The silence was immense. For the first time, the silence around Leo didn't feel oppressive. It felt like a part of the landscape, a natural, holy quiet. They walked inside. The air was cool and smelled of old wood and candle wax. Sunlight streamed in through a single small window, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny fairies. And there, on a simple altar adorned with fresh desert flowers and a few dozen flickering vigil lights, was the statue. She wasn't large or ornate. She was maybe 3 feet tall, carved from dark wood. Her paint was faded, her hands folded in prayer, her gaze downcast, gentle and infinitely kind. She didn't radiate power, she radiated compassion. A mother's compassion. Sarah felt her breath catch. She knelt in a pew, her tears finally coming, not in sobs but in a quiet, steady stream. She wasn't even praying for a miracle anymore. She was just presenting her son. Presenting her broken family. "Look after him," her heart whispered. "However you can." David stood at the back, uncomfortable. He shoved his hands in his pockets. This was silly. A statue couldn't fix his son. But the peace in the room was palpable. It was a physical presence, soothing the ragged edges of his soul. He found himself offering up a prayer, not even in words but in a raw feeling. "I'm so tired. I don't know what to do." Aunt Clara sat peacefully, her eyes closed, a soft smile on her face. And Leo? He was mesmerized. He slipped out of his mother's grasp and walked slowly, deliberately, down the short aisle until he was standing right before the statue. He didn't touch it. He just looked up, his head tilted. The beam of sunlight from the window seemed to find him, lighting up his sandy hair like a halo. He stood there, perfectly still, for what felt like an eternity. His usual look of quiet observation was gone, replaced by an expression of intense, profound focus. It was as if he was listening to a song only he could hear. Sarah watched him, her heart pounding. She saw his little chest rise and fall. She saw his lips part just slightly. And then it happened. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a shout or a clear word. It was a sound, small and fragile, a whisper that somehow filled the entire silent space. "Mama." The word hung in the air, delicate as a soap bubble. Sarah froze. She couldn't have heard that. It was the wind. It was her imagination, her desperate, years-long prayer manifesting as an auditory hallucination. But then Leo turned. He turned away from the statue, his eyes, those brilliant summer sky eyes, found hers. They were clear. They were focused. They were present in a way she had never, ever seen before. He took a breath deeper this time. His small brow furrowed with effort, with the monumental task of forming a word for the very first time. He looked right at her and he said it again, clearer, with more intention. Mama. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for 5 years. It was the sound of a spring flower pushing through frozen ground. It was the most beautiful, the most impossible, the most miraculous sound Sarah Miller had ever heard. She didn't run to him. She fell to her knees, her hands flying to her mouth, a choked, disbelieving sob escaping her. Leo, she whispered, her voice trembling. David from the back of the church had heard it too. The sound had sliced through his skepticism, through his fatigue, through his despair. He was rooted to the spot, his eyes wide, his mouth agape. He saw his son standing in a beam of light, looking at his mother. He saw the recognition, the connection that had been missing for so long. Leo, encouraged, took a few steps toward Sarah. He pointed a tiny finger back at the statue of the Virgin, his face breaking into a radiant, unburdened smile. Pretty, he said. The word was soft, a little slurred but unmistakable. That single, additional word broke the spell. David stumbled forward, collapsing into the pew next to Sarah, pulling both her and Leo into a crushing, tearful embrace. They were all crying now, great heaving sobs of relief, of joy, of utter shock. They were a tangled mess of arms and tears and laughter, the silence of their world shattered by 2 simple, earth-shattering words. Mama. Pretty. Aunt Clara watched them, her hands clasped together, tears of joy streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. She hadn't promised them anything. She had just brought them to a place of peace. The rest was grace. The drive home was nothing like the drive there. It was filled with a dazed, euphoric wonder. Leo didn't become a chatterbox. The floodgates didn't open to a torrent of speech. But he spoke. He pointed at a cow and said, "Cow." He saw a truck and said, "Big." He looked at David and, after a moment of concentration, said, "Dada." Each word was a jewel, a treasure. They weren't just words, they were proof. Proof of a connection restored, a barrier fallen. The doctors, when they saw him again, were baffled. They could find no medical explanation. They called it a spontaneous remission, a term that felt to Sarah and David like a scientific way of saying, "We don't know, and it's wonderful." But the Millers knew. They knew they had reached the end of themselves, the end of all human solutions. They knew they had stood in a place of humble, desperate faith, and in that place something had happened. A window had been opened. A mother's prayer, offered at the feet of another mother, had been answered in a way more profound than they could have ever imagined. Leo's voice continued to grow, slowly and steadily. The tension in their home melted away, replaced by a joy that was loud and messy and beautiful. David learned that some things can't be fixed with hands, only with faith. Sarah's light returned, brighter than ever. Their marriage, once strained to its breaking point, was now fortified by a shared, awe-inspiring secret. They had witnessed the impossible. The world is a mysterious place, far more mysterious than we often allow ourselves to believe. We walk through our days, bound by the laws of physics and probability, forgetting that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe bends. Sometimes silence is broken by a whisper. Sometimes a heartbroken family in a dusty West Texas town drives 3 hours into the desert and finds their way home, guided by a light they never expected to see. This story, the story of the Miller family, is a testament to the power of hope when all seems lost. It's a reminder that miracles don't always have to be grand, global events. Sometimes the greatest miracles are the quiet, personal ones that heal a single heart, restore a single voice, and save a single family. Maybe you're facing your own silence right now. Your own seemingly impossible situation. A health diagnosis, a broken relationship, a financial struggle, a deep, personal grief that feels like it will never lift. It's easy to lose hope. It's easy to believe that the outcome is already written, and that it's a tragic one. But the story of Leo Miller asks us to reconsider. It asks us to look for peace in the humble places. To have the courage to ask for help from whatever source you believe in, even when, especially when, you feel you've tried everything. Your miracle might not look like a little boy speaking in a dusty mission church. It might look like a sudden opportunity where there was none. It might look like an unexpected reconciliation. It might look like a profound sense of peace washing over you in the middle of your storm. But it is out there. Hope is a currency that never devalues. Now, I have a few requests for you. If this story of Leo and his family touched your heart, if it renewed a flicker of hope in your own spirit, then please subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you're not just clicking a button. You're joining a community that believes in the power of hope, in the possibility of the extraordinary. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next story of light in the darkness. This is where the conversation truly begins. We want to hear from you. In the comments below, tell us about a moment of grace, a miracle, big or small, that you have witnessed or experienced in your own life. Your story has the power to uplift someone else who is reading it right now, someone who needs to hear that they are not alone. And finally, share this video. Share it with a friend, a family member, a colleague, with anyone you feel needs to be reminded that the story isn't over yet. That the most beautiful chapters are often written after the point where we thought it was all lost. Share it to renew someone's hope today. Thank you for watching. Hold on to hope. It is a light that no darkness can truly extinguish.